On this President's Day, we're going to take a look at George Washington. Our first president was also, of course, commander of the American Army as it fought for independence. A pivotal battle that happened right here in our region, in White Plains in Westchester County. Washington, he was there. So was a young artillery officer named Alexander Hamilton. Well, RFL executive producer Larry Epstein, he visited Washington's headquarters and also the battlefield on Chatterton Hill. Larry?
Thanks, Rich. Washington commanded the Army in 1776 from the Purdy House. That was his headquarters. And he also returned there back in 1778, 2 years later, as the war continued in the county. Redcoats in White Plains. George Washington stayed in that house to fight them back in 1776. After losing the Battle of Long Island, which was actually in Brooklyn in August of 1776, and getting flushed out of Manhattan by the British Army, General George Washington had retreated with his men up to Westchester. At that time, Westchester was split pretty evenly between loyalists to the crown and patriots who wanted independence. Here's John Vorparian, president of the White Plains Historical Society.
It was really a no man's land because no one was in control, and it was a frightful time to be living here in White Plains.
In October of 1776, during the three-day Battle of White Plains, Washington was headquartered right here at the Purdy House. It was a farmhouse built in the 1730s, and it's been preserved ever since, even though it was moved to its current spot on Park Avenue. Now it's in the shadows of downtown White Plains, saved and preserved for generations to enjoy it.
Putting it aside and preserving it so that future generations and school children who come through here get to actually walk on the same floorboards that the first president of the United States did.
And everyone who visits asks the same question: did Washington sleep there? Vorparian says he was probably too busy for that.
Essentially 3 days in October 1776. Whether he slept, I can tell you that it was in people's journals, soldiers' journals, talking about always seeing Washington on horseback. I don't know how much time he had to sleep.
The battle itself raged on Chatterton Hill, a spot specifically picked as it was hard to take and easy to defend. And it took 3 days for the British to finally take it. Hundreds of British and Hessian soldiers were storming up this hill the Americans were trying to hold. That was the Battle of White Plains. Revolutionary War reenactor Jack Ciotti explains what it was like for the Redcoats.
And then we had to charge the hill 3 times. And then we finally overcame the Americans, and they took off and ran across what's now the bridge down there into what's now White Plains.
Dennis Jones is a reenactor on the American side.
Washington's troops on Chatterton Hill here, approximately 1,600 men, were witnessing approximately 4,000 British and Hessian soldiers advancing to take the position that we had up here.
A young artillery officer, who's now a rock star, also fought on that hill.
And the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man? Alexander Hamilton.
This is the site where Alexander Hamilton moved cannons to fight off the British. He moved 2 cannons to the top of the hill and defended the top of the hill until they retreated. He was able to fire cannons down the hill to hold off the Hessians who were coming up on the left side and the British Army who was coming up on the right side.
The British Army was the most powerful on earth, and to them, war was a show as well as a show of force.
The Americans, if you read any of the accounts, said it was one of the most beautiful sights they ever saw. The British Army formed up in line of battle with all the flags flying, and the drummers and the officers, of course, looked very grand.
By comparison, the Americans were a ragtag army. No redcoats, no fancy uniforms. They were basically farmers, blacksmiths, ordinary people, fighting for their country before it was even a country.
The uniform is basically civilian. We're kind of like militia, better trained, and this is what the private citizen would have worn. I'd be coming from my home and falling in with the Army.
Their own clothes, they even had to bring their own muskets.
We usually did have our own individual weapons, not being part of the actual Army. We had what we would use every day at home for hunting.
The battle was basically a draw, but it did enable Washington to hold off the British and retreat across New Jersey to regroup. And Ciotti says that made it pivotal and a victory for the Americans. Who won the battle?
That's a good question. Who won the battle? The British actually occupied the field, but they went back to New York. The campaign was over. So it's actually a more important battle than it's given credit for, because if the British had won this, it would have ended the war.
The White Plains Historical Society is holding an event Sunday to celebrate George Washington. All the info you need is right there on your screen. It's at the Purdy House, 1 till 3 p.m., reenactors, a flag-raising ceremony, food, drinks, activities for the kids, and the best part, it's all free. For more information, just go to whiteplainshistory.org. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Larry. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Go check that out Sunday. We'll see you, though, back here tomorrow evening. See you then.